the early hours of one fateful day in 2025, the cold expanse of the high-altitude skies over the Baltic Sea turned into a theater of unprecedented tension. A Russian unmanned combat drone, its wings cutting through the air with lethal purpose, converged on an American F-35 stealth fighter. The collision was no accident. It was a calculated strike. The drone's metal frame impacted the F-35's wing with bone-shattering force, scrubbing stealth coating and tearing through advanced composite materials in an instant. The jet's sleek form buckled under the sudden assault. In that split-second moment, the pilot's world exploded with alarms, warning signals, and the terrors of imminent disaster. Minutes mattered, but in truth, it was over in seconds. The drone vanished into the cold air, leaving behind a wounded aircraft in its wake. The once invulnerable F-35 now limped through the sky, metal shrieking under stress, systems failing. It was the world's most advanced fighter brought low by an unmanned threat, a striking testament to how modern warfare had shifted dramatically. From the cockpit, the pilot's voice cut through secure channels. "Mayday, Mayday, F-35 hit, systems compromised, attempting controlled descent." The transmission crackled with controlled panic, her voice barely audible above the alarms, yet resolute. The U.S. Navy's reaction was swift and unapologetic. Carriers repositioned, combat air patrols ascended. The Baltic no longer lay under a cloak of routine surveillance. The sky had turned hostile. The U.S. Navy mustered its full might. Fighter jets launched from carriers, naval drones took to the air, armed with precision targeting. The mission: show force and resolve. Naval Command invoked protocols for defensive navigation and upholding international law. Radar lit up the sky, tracking hostile aircraft, while Tomahawk-armed cruisers locked onto strategic targets. F-35s and FA-18s roared into the fray, a phalanx of deterrent power poised against further aggression. The geopolitical stakes had never been higher. At the Pentagon, emergency sessions in the Situation Room unfolded with measured urgency. The President, Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and National Security Advisor each watched the digital map flicker as the jet's corridor degraded. The question loomed: was this an isolated provocation, or a declaration disguised as an incident? Intelligence assessments debated the likelihood of miscalculation versus intent. Within the hour, Congress was briefed. International allies, including NATO, were alerted. The incident sparked consultations with Baltic and European partners. Everyone held their breath, awaiting Moscow's response, but there was silence. No apology, no explanation, just radio static and rising temperatures within diplomatic channels. International anxiety mounted. The world watched as frozen images of the battered jet began circulating in media reports. Analysts debated on networks. Think tank experts weighed in with urgency. Was this a test of American resolve? A show of hybrid power projecting Russian ambition? In just 24 hours, the U.S. Navy brought its full power to bear. Carrier strike groups circled the Baltic, ships bristling with interceptors and drones. Air superiority patrols buzzed the sky. Tomahawk missiles glinted on launchers as targets were identified. Drone control hubs, radar arrays, even command centers around Kaliningrad felt the reach of American force. The message was clear: aggression would be met with overwhelming precision. The pilot, though shaken, managed to guide the crippled F-35 toward a controlled ditching near the sea. Rescue helicopters were launched within minutes. The pilot was recovered, shaken, but alive. His survival became a symbol, not just of technology, but human endurance. In evacuation footage, rain and sea spray blurred as crew lifted him aboard. He was hoisted into the aircraft with faces set in grim relief, trauma etched but strength intact. Worldwide watches stopped. News cycles roared, markets jittered, diplomats scrambled. The drone strike had breached more than metal. It had crossed an invisible red line. Nations condemned the act. NATO invoked Article 4, consultation for any member whose security is threatened, and began planning joint air patrol reinforcements. Allies pledged solidarity. Deployments surged. Satellite feeds and reconnaissance flights increased. Russia, sensing the strength arrayed against it, stayed silent. In the halls of power, decisions crackled through secure lines. Washington debated response options. Could restraint make the world safer, or would inaction embolden? The calculus of deterrence weighed heavy. Nuclear thresholds, cyber reactions, economic sanctions, all were on the table. But the breadth of the U.S. Navy's swift mobilization offered its own gravity. NATO naval forces were repositioned, fighter wings on alert, logistics networks sprang into overdrive. At sea and from the decks of carriers, news briefings were issued. The Navy's public statement emphasized protection of freedom of navigation and the sanctity of international airspace. An unprecedented drone assault on a U.S. combat aircraft cannot go unanswered, the spokesperson declared. The Navy remains vigilant, prepared, and unwavering. Meanwhile, global media honed in. Headlines screamed, "Drone ram sparks global military crisis. F-35 down by Russian drone. War clouds gather. Baltic flashpoint. Drone becomes catalyst." In editorial corridors, experts lamented the new face of warfare, autonomous weapons against manned fighters, and how rules of engagement had to evolve. Conferences convened with urgency. Diplomats and defense contractors alike took note. This was a turning point. Flash delays spread the point further. Russia and the U.S. were now skirting open conflict in a digital battlefield saturated with drones and stealth. All eyes turned to Kaliningrad, where intelligence assessments warned of further escalation. The U.S. Navy's presence grew even stronger. Reconnaissance flights surveyed corridors. Submarines patrolled silently beneath waves. Diplomacy surged with Allied coordination, yet war games dictated readiness. On the diplomatic front, emergency sessions were convened at the UN Security Council. The U.S. delegation pressed Moscow to account for the drone's actions. Russia called it a mistake, but with no evidence offered. The ambiguity fed tension. Allies reinforced the U.S. position. Resolutions loomed, but with veto powers, the Council gridlocked. Behind closed doors, officials prepared contingency plans. Days passed. The physical wounds of the jet became secondary to the ideological ones. Militaries adapted strategies. Cockpit defenses were revised. Reinforced enclosures, drone jamming protocols, evasive AI aids. Drone swarms, once novelty, were now existential threats. Commanders tasked designers to rethink air dominance. No longer was stealth enough. Resilience had become vital. Elsewhere, stories circulated of naval drone swarms testing Russian exfiltration corridors, of F-35 squadrons rehearsing counter-drone algorithms over Allied skies. Intelligence networks shared data as never before, forging tighter bonds between NATO members. Even adversaries paused. China watched with interest, re-evaluating its own drone escalation plans. The world's narrative had shifted. Within the U.S. military, commendations were awarded. The pilot, celebrated for his courage under fire, stood at attention as medals were pinned to his uniform. He said little, but his eyes spoke volumes. He had seen the worst, survived, and now represented a country ready to defend its skies at any cost. In the award citation, it read, "For valor under extreme duress, for upholding the creed that no threat is greater than American resolve." Tension slowly cooled, but the world wasn't the same. A fragile detente replaced immediate danger. The Baltic corridor returned to watchfulness, not calm. Joint drills and intelligence sharing carried heavy residue of awareness. New treaties were drafted, regulating drone armaments and air intercept protocols. In university lecture halls, the incident would be dissected for decades. Discussions of deterrence, drone ethics, hybrid missions, and the razor-thin margins of peace. And yet, even as cameras faded from headlines, the memory remained. A drone, machine-precise yet reckless, had rammed a symbol of American air superiority. The response that followed sent ripples across alliances and adversaries alike. The skies had witnessed a collision not only of metal, but of nations. History had changed course. In the hushed corridors of power, the lesson remained. Modern warfare had evolved. Stealth and speed were no longer invulnerable. Intelligence and alliances mattered more. But above all, resolve mattered most. And in that moment when the pilot called for help from his shattered cockpit, the world remembered that resolve and the cost to preserve it was universal.